Hey, I'm Kev, Mr. Cole, and welcome to the penultimate episode of my summer partner back at the 2015 Verizon IndyCar Series season. In the last episode, we looked at the mixed bag which was Andretti Autosport, and boy, we got another here as we're looking at the second of the big three teams in the Verizon IndyCar Series. There's no denying the pedigree of Roger Penske's outfit, a multiple Indy 500 Series champion, but in 2015, their start off season signing looked like they'd run over a black cat. Their reigning champion was never quite in the title hunt, along with the team veteran, and so it was left to the Indy 500 champ to fight for glory at the season finale in Sonoma. But once again, it was familiar tales. The team fell apart, letting their old enemy grab the title from right under their noses once again, which just leaves lots of questions at Team Penske's door. It was another Penske season that just fell up short. As heading into the 2015 season, the team expanded to 4 full-time efforts for the first time ever, I believe. Well, was the expansion worth it? Well, in the number 22 car was Simon Pagenaud, a big off-season signing from Smith Peterson Motorsports, where he had done wonders for the team, finishing in the top 5 in the championship for 3 years straight. Well, in 2015 at times, he was just the recipient of bad luck and just not really been there in the races. As the Frenchman finished 11th in the final standings with 2 podiums, 1 pole, 4 top 5 and 9 top 10 finishes and 384 points. Competed in all 16 races, finished 14 of them with 12 lead-out finishes. His best start was a pole at Fontana, second at St. Pete, Texas, Toronto and Pocono, and third at Alabama and the Indy 500. His best finish was third at the first race in Detroit and Mid-Ohio, fourth at Long Beach, fifth at St. Pete and seventh at Pocono. His average start was 5.2, third, and his average finish was 10.6, 11th. He had 2 retirements due to crashes at Noda and a gearbox issue at the Indy GP, and he led 132 laps, 2 of them at St. Pete, 3 in Alabama, 35 at the Indy 500, 59 at Texas, 3 at Fontana, and 30 at Pocono. What a mysterious year for Pagenaud, as after moving from Smith Peterson Motorsports, a mostly one-car effort while he was there, to the juggernaut that is Penske, you would have thought in 2015 he'd be challenging for wins, challenging for the title, but it just never materialised. As after a great start in St. Pete, finishing in the top 5, he had Noda where he was running strong until he got into a 3-wide situation, and Ryan Hunter-Reay didn't keep his deal of the bargain in that situation. And then at Long Beach he finished 4th, battling for the podium. And then at Alabama he finished 9th. It was a very solid start to the year. Then the month of May started to signal the change of things, with the gearbox issue in the Grand Prix of Indianapolis, the race he won in 2014, and then in the Indy 500, qualifying on the front row, leading quite a few laps in the first half of that race, and then just dropped off to 10th. In the end, that seemed to epitomise what happened to him in 2015, where he qualified incredibly strongly. As a whole, Penske were the best qualifying outfit, but in races he just fell off. I don't really understand what happened to him in races, as he backed up that Indy 500 with a great podium in the first race in Detroit, and in the second race 14th, and then Texas 11th, Toronto 11th, Fontana 9th, Milwaukee 9th, Iowa 14th, just a run-off form, struggling to get into the top 10 in races, getting top 10 finishes. It was that really derailed his season before he came back at Mid-Ohio, grabbing a podium there, 7th at Pocono after leading quite a few laps there, and then, in Sonoma, didn't quite get the finish there. So, it's just a strange season for Pagenaud, finishing outside of the top 10 in the championship. You don't expect that from a Penske driver. You don't expect that from someone who's been so strong with Smith Peterson Motorsports, battling for the title in 2013 with them, to just suddenly just fall off the wagon in 2015. There's going to be lots of things to look at for him in 2016. He was Honda's main guy, and then he moved to be part of the Chevrolet gang at Penske, and I'm not sure if there was just a big change from the way he had to drive, with the Honda engine compared to the Chevrolet, compared to the aero kits as well. trying to get on top of that. Maybe he just never quite got used to it. But there was just a dynamic with Penske in 2015 that just didn't work. And Pagenaud was definitely the main recipient of that. And for whatever reason, they've got to look at whatever happened in 2015 and try and fix that for 2016. Try and get the potential out of Pagenaud that we saw so much of at Smith Peterson Motorsports. And, he's got a very strong record, in sports cars with Peugeot in the past. He's was superb in Champ Car and Champ Car Atlantic, winning that championship a decade ago. So he's been strong everywhere he's gone, Pagenaud. So that's what makes it such a surprise to see him not do as well with Penske in 2015. And maybe being the fourth wheel rather than being the guy affected Pagenaud as well as the team, as in the past couple of years the chemistry has been rather strong in the Penske camp since Juan Pablo Montoya joined in 2014. And alongside the fiery Colombian, you have Will Power, perhaps the quickest guy over one lap in the Verizon IndyCar series, and someone who finally got over the hump and won a championship in 2014. And then you have the team veteran, the showman, Helio Castroneves, who has been alongside the captain for about 15 years now. And in that span, he's won 3 Indy 500s, but has never won a title and never looked like winning the crown, unfortunately. In 2015, in his number 3 car, has the Brazilian finished 5th in the championship with 5 podiums, 4 poles, 4 fastest laps, the most of anyone, 6 top 5 and 9 top 10 finishes, and 453 points. Competed in all 16 races, finished 13 of them, with all of them being lead lap finishes. His best start were poles at Long Beach, Alabama, Iowa and Pocono, and second in the first race in Detroit and Fontana. His best finish was second at NOLA, Long Beach and Milwaukee, and third at Texas and Toronto. His average start was 4.9, second out of everyone in 2015, while his average finish was 9.3. Fifth, he had 3 retirements due to crashes in the second race in Detroit, at Fontana and at Pocono. He led 198 laps throughout the year, one of them at St. Pete, at NOLA, at Long Beach he led 31 laps, 18 at Alabama, 2 at the Indy 500, 7 at Texas, 15 at Toronto, 43 at Fontana, 50 at Iowa, 6 at Mid-Ohio and 24 at Pocono. So it was a very disappointing season for Castroneves in the end after battling for the title in 2013 and 2014. Yeah, he was mathematically in it heading to Sonoma, but realistically his title challenger got undone a few races earlier. As he started off the 2015 season really well, grabbed the fastest lap on his way to 4th at St. Pete, and then grabbed a couple of podiums at NOLA. Strategy came to save his day after he punted Joe Coney round early in that race, and in the end ended up in the middle of a Smith Peterson Motorsports sandwich. And then at Long Beach grabbed the pole, but Scott Dixon was the faster guy that day, so he had to settle for second. And then at Alabama grabbed another pole, but the strategy just didn't work out that race, and in the end he ran out of fuel and then at a stage of that race on his way to 15th. And so we headed to the month of May, and this perhaps highlighted that it wasn't going to be Castroneves' year, as at the Grand Prix of Indianapolis again he made a interesting move on Dixon, and Judy got fined and got penalty points for that incident on his way to 6th in the end in that race. And then at the Indy 500 qualified well on the second row, but it was mystifying in that stage of that race. He just didn't have the pace to challenge for the win and ended up in 7th in the end, which is a superb result at the famous speedway for anyone, but for a guy who's one of the most celebrated drivers round there, that was quite disappointing to see. So at Detroit he grabbed another top 10 in the first race there, but in the second race he made a mistake and went into his teammate Will Power. So that first half of the season showed fantastic pace, couple of podiums, a couple of poles, but he's just not getting it together really to get a win in races. But he started off the second half of the season quite well, grabbed a podium at Texas and then got another fastest lap on his way to a podium at Toronto. Then at Fontana, I think it was the first of many incidents in that chaotic second half of that race, and then grabbed a podium at Milwaukee with another fastest lap, but Bourdais was miles ahead of anyone in that race. But it was the final quarter of the season which really undid his title challenge, as he grabbed another pole at Iowa but dropped back in the race to 11th, then at Mid-Ohio to 15th, then at Pocono grabbed another pole but his race got undone like many other drivers. And so heading to Sonoma, he's now an outside chance for the title, and in that race he grabbed 15th despite another fastest lap. So for Castro Neves, a very disappointing end to the season, which started off quite well, and he just didn't have the consistency like he had done the previous couple of years, particularly in 2013, where he's grabbing all of these top 10 finishes and heading to the penultimate weekend at Houston. He's really had one hand on the title, but Chip Ganassi and Scott Dixon had got together in the second half of that season after a very poor first half, and they were just charging. And so for Castro Neves, he just had a poor weekend at Houston with a couple of mechanical issues, and so Dixon grabbed the initiative that weekend and headed to Fontana, in the championship lead, and in the end won that championship ahead of Castro Neves. And then in 2014, he was a bit criticised for being quite conservative in 2013, grabbing top 10, so he was a bit more aggressive, grabbing more top 5s, but in the end, his teammate Will Power is just a stronger driver, and in the last third of his season, Castro Neves just fell off the rails in finishes, even though he had some decent pace, and so ended up second once again, this time to his teammate. So in 2015, I'm not sure what we were kind of expecting from Castro Neves, another title challenge perhaps, but it just never really materialised in my eyes, as he never won a race. So that is incredibly disappointing for Castro Neves not to even win a race in 2015, with superb one-lap pacing, qualifying in the race as well, grabbing the most fastest laps, but just not putting it together to win a race. So for Castro Neves, 2015 might be the sign of things to come, as he's now on the wrong side of 40, unfortunately, after hitting that mark in the month of May alongside his great pal, Tony Kanaan, alongside his teammate, Juan Pablo Montoya. And while Montoya is still a very strong driver, Castro Neves might be starting to regress, might be, he's definitely in the twilight years of his IndyCar career. So you might have seen the best of Castro Neves already, and he perhaps had his best chance to win a title in 2013, when, as I said, he had one hand on that title with 3 races to go. But in 2015 for Castro Neves, superb pace once again, but just so disappointing in kind of not winning races and just not working out in races. Unfortunately, as I said, that might be the sign of things to come for Castro Neves with this crowded house at Penske. And theoretically, the man who was meant to lead this crowded house in 2015 was the reigning champion, Will Power, with that number 1 car. But it didn't quite turn out that way, as he finished 3rd in the championship with 1 win, 3 podiums, 6 poles, the most of anyone, 2 fastest laps, 7 top 5 finishes, and 10 top 10 finishes, and 493 points. Competed in all 16 races, finished 13 of them with 11 lead lap finishes. His best start was pole at St. Pete, the Indy GP, the first race in Detroit, Texas, Toronto and Sonoma, and was second 5 times. His best finish was that win at the Indy GP, second at St. Pete and the Indy 500, and 4th 4 times. His average start was 4.1, the best of anyone in 2015, while his average finish was 9.46. His 3 retirements were due to crashes at the second race in Detroit, in Fontana and Milwaukee, and he led 298 laps throughout the year, 75 of them at St. Pete, 65 at the Indy GP, 23 at the Indy 500, 4 in the first race in Detroit, 2 in the second race in Detroit, 7 at Texas, 30 at Toronto, 62 at Fontana, 2 at Iowa, 2 at Pocono, and 26 at Sonoma. So for Power, it wasn't the title defence he was looking for in 2015, as no doubt he had the pace. 11 front row starts, 11 races in which he led laps, but only 1 win in the end. That is what it comes down to for Power. And that was a very dominant win at the Grand Prix of Indianapolis. No pole, leading the most laps, and in the end fighting off a quite a strong challenge from Graham Rahal, but he was in control of that race and perhaps should have won the Indy 500 as well. Very strong throughout the whole of that race, but he couldn't stop that raging Montoya behind him in those last few laps. And that was the case in St. Pete as well, where he grabbed pole. They had a good portion of that race, but Montoya was just stronger in the end. And that's what it was like throughout the whole of the season. Montoya was just racking up the results while Power's struggling to do that. And that was the case for all the Penske drivers, really, where they're just battling each other throughout the year, taking points off each other, as I highlighted at St. Pete and the Indy 500. While Chip Ganassi, Dixon was perhaps fighting his teammates on occasion, particularly in Detroit. I remember him getting taken out, I think it was by Kimball, unwittingly, by Kimball in the end there. But in the end, they were just all working for Dixon, as highlighted at Sonoma. Sonoma really did highlight the different seasons for Penske and Chip Ganassi, as Power had the pole at Sonoma. They had a good portion of the first part of that race, and then it came a bit undone in pit lane when he had to I think he had to delay himself slightly for his teammate Simon Pagenaud, who really had to delay himself in pit lane, basically just stopped and got in the way of Joseph Newgarden. And then Power got spun round by his teammate Juan Pablo Montoya as after the stops, Columbia was trying to make his way up the order, going for this title, but just got too aggressive on his teammate. Power was around, and effectively that move cost Penske the title, as in the end Power finished behind his Colombian teammate in 7th in the end. Had a bit of a tirade after the race and got a bit aggressive against Chip Ganassi and against Dixon. It really was a relapse from Power at Sonoma, where he calmed himself down for the most part during the season. His tempo was a touch better. Of course, he was a bit aggressive at moments, as I said, at Sonoma. And, he had things go against his way. And that's what's happened in 2015 for Power. He just wasn't getting no results while his teammate Montoya was. And at times his teammate Castroneves was. But like Castroneves, he just found that middle part of the season just went against him at Detroit in the second race, where he got taken out by Castroneves. In Texas, where after starting on pole, leading a good part of that battling Pagenaud in the first half of that race, and the second half, that was all Chip Ganassi. That was all Dixon and Kanaan in the end, and he got that by the Chip Ganassi pair on his way to 13th. And then at Fontana, in the middle of a free ride, I think he got touched by Ryan Briscoe, his Aussie pal there, and went into Sato. Unfortunately, took the pair out of that race. And then at Milwaukee, got taken out by his good old pal there, Briscoe, in that race as well, when Briscoe spun in the final corner. Then at Iowa, dropped back to 10th. At Mid-Ohio, even though he had the fastest lap, dropped to 14th. I'm just reading off the results of just the race that just did not work out, as highlighted at Long Beach, where he finished 20th. I think it was he who stalled in pit lane, delayed, I remember, Luca Filippi famously, and so he ended up in 20th for that down in the end. It was just a year of very up and down results for Power, like it has been in his Verizon IndyCar Series career as a whole. And so for the next couple of years, it's perhaps going to be Power against Dixon with Chip Ganassi, and he perhaps doesn't have the infrastructure in Penske that Dixon does have at Chip Ganassi, where the team is effectively built around the Kiwi. Well, for the Aussie, he's going to be battling perhaps Simon Pagenaud in the next couple of years, as Pagenaud is still getting used to the situation that Penske has highlighted with a disappointing 2015 campaign for the Frenchman. But he also has a couple of teammates on the wrong side of 40 in Castroneves, who's very much in the twilight of his IndyCar career, and Montoya. We don't know how long he's going to last in IndyCar before he perhaps wants to go sports car racing. Of course, he's talked about perhaps going to Le Mans with Porsche. So for Power, it's perhaps going to be his team in 2017, perhaps 2016 onwards. We have to see how Montoya goes, how Pagenaud goes. So for Power, it's his time to win titles. He's got one of them 2014. He's got to grab a couple of them before he runs out of time. He's in his mid-30s already. It's incredible how time has caught up to him, playing the bridesmaids for a couple of years against Chip Ganassi with Dario Franchitti. Will be doing the same against Dixon in the next couple of years. That is the big question mark about the title battle, at least in IndyCar, I believe, in the next couple of years. It's going to be Penske v Chip Ganassi, Dixon v Power, perhaps, just like he had against Dario Franchitti at the turn of the decade, in the early part of this decade. So for power, in the end, 2015 was perhaps a sign of things to come, and has been the sign of power in IndyCar throughout his whole career, basically, just battling his teammates and battling himself. Will he be doing that again in 2016 onwards? Well, I think he will, but in 2015 it was that case again for the Australian. And the last of the battling Penske teammates and their lead title challenger in 2015 was the Colombian Juan Pablo Montoya, as he just ended up short in the end with the number 2 car, second in the championship with 2 wins, 5 podiums, 1 fastest lap, 9 top 5 and 13 top 10 finishes and 556 points. Competed in all 16 races, finished 15 of them with 14 leads out finishes. His best start were poles at Noda and the second race in Detroit, second at Long Beach, third in the first race in Detroit, Toronto and Iowa. His best finish was wins in St. Pete and at the Indy 500, third at Long Beach, the Indy GP and Pocono, and fourth 3 times. His average start was 6.4, fifth. His average finish was 6.9, the best of all drivers in 2015. His one retirement due to a crash at Iowa, and he led 145 laps throughout the year, 27 of them at St. Pete, 31 at Noda, 1 in Alabama, 9 at the Indy 500, 35 in the second race in Detroit, 16 at Texas, 5 at Fontana, and 21 at Mid-Ohio. So what a year for Montoya, very different compared to his comeback year of 2014 to Opel Racing after almost a decade away, spent mainly in NASCAR, a very different type of automobile. And he talked about in 2014 it's quite natural, driving the ovals and in IndyCar because they drive quite a few of them in NASCAR, so I've heard. And that was where he scored most of his points. That's where he got his most impressive results throughout the year, particularly in the Triple Crown races, which counted for double points in 2014. So at the Indy 500, where he got the fastest lap on his way to 5th in that race. At Pocono, where he started from pole and dominated that race with a fantastic win, one of the fastest races ever. And at Fontana, where he finished 4th in the season finale. So that's where he scored the bulk of his points in 2014. But it's a very different story on the road and street courses. He said how it's so difficult to adapt after driving a NASCAR on the road and street courses. A very different type of vehicle. There, of course, they accelerate well, but everything else is a bit slower than an IndyCar. And so, he's struggling to get the pace out of the red sidewall tyres in qualifying, so he wasn't, very impressive in qualifying. And then he was struggling to make those tyres, stay alive for a whole stint. So he's having to pit early in races because he was just burning up his tyres during races. We particularly saw that at the double-header weekends in 2014 in Detroit and Toronto, where, it's particularly in Toronto, he was just miserable that whole weekend. So, it's very difficult on the road and street courses for Montoya to adapt. But it's not like he'd gone away and done his homework. And so in 2015, at the first race in St. Pete, it immediately showed, where he qualified really well and he was running second behind his teammate Will Power for most of the race. And even on the harder tyres, he had superb race pace. And so in the last round of stops, he managed to jump his teammate, grab that lead and just hold off his Aussie Power at the end there. He got a bit rough with about 10 laps to go, but he held on for the win. And it's just fantastic contrast to what happened in 2014 when he finished 15th in that race, just struggling in the mid-pack, trying to hold on to his tyres. In 2015, he was just in total control, and that just shows the driver that Montoya is. He will go away, he will adapt, he will learn. He just absorbs knowledge, and that's what we learnt about him actually in this off-season from the interviews that I've seen. He just, he works with all his engineers, with all of his teammates, and with the, resources at the disposal of Penske. Of course, it helps, speed up that process of learning. And as we saw in 2015, he had learnt a lot. He grabbed a couple of poles at Noda in the second race in Detroit, but that's due to those qualifying sessions being rained down. He was leading the championship when that happened, but he still finished in the top 5 in Noda, made some good moves during that race, got a podium even in Long Beach, just ahead of his teammate Simon Pagenaud. That was a pretty good battle. In Alabama, a bit of an off weekend, though. He really was lost in that race at times, and in the end just finished 14th, just ahead of his teammate Helio Castroneves. But then we come to the month of May, a very impressive month of May. On the podium in the Grand Prix of Indianapolis, even though he got leapfrogged by Graham Rahal during that race. You didn't expect that, but Penske just got out strategized by the Rahal Edmond team. Fantastic effort from them. And then the Indy 500, where he was down the field early on, had to pit early, had to fight his way through the field. And what a fight it was in those last few laps with Will Powell, with Charlie Kimball, with Scott Dixon for that win. And it boiled down to him just being stronger than Power and just mustering his way to that win and grabbing his second Indy 500 win after winning it in 2000. Chip Ganassi racing in one of the most impressive rookie performances you will ever see at the Speedway. He followed it up in 2015 with an equally as impressive performance in May. And then we come to Detroit, where he got a couple of 10th place finishes. It just didn't quite work out on the strategy side there. And then, it's a strong run of 4th place finishes at Texas, Fontana, Milwaukee. At Toronto, he finished 7th. Then we come to his only retirement of the year at Iowa. I believe it was component failure, which caused his crash there early in the race. And then we come to Mid-Ohio, where he finished 11th. Just got on the wrong side of the strategy and cautions there as well. And so Graham Rahal is now breathing down his neck, heading to Pocono. And you're wondering, maybe Montoya is going to be a bit vulnerable. Maybe Rahal's going to be vulnerable as well, because this is basically his first title battle. And in the end, it was Rahal who, he didn't blink. He got taken out by Vautier. And so Montoya grabbed a podium there. And, this was his title now, heading to Sonoma. Without double points, he basically had this title secured, but with the double points, that really opened the door to Chip Ganassi and to Scott Dixon, as we saw in the race. And Montoya made a mistake in that race, a vital mistake in that race, getting too aggressive on his teammate Will Power and spinning the Australian round. So he had to go down the field, and he was battling his way through the field, and he just ended up a couple of laps short from guaranteeing the points that he needed to finish ahead of the Kiwi points-wise, because they ended up tied on points. But Scott Dixon had 3 wins compared to Montoya's 2, so the Colombian lost the title at the final round of the season after leading it all the way through the season. That was a real body blow. But I saw in the same interview back in January, last month, that he was actually partying with Will Power by the evening. That's his mentality. He doesn't linger on things. He gets over them quite quickly. He doesn't expect too much. If he wins, of course he's happy, but that's just one win. He's going to carry that. He wants to do that in the next race, and the race after, he always wants to carry wins. And so for Montoya in 2015, he certainly did that. He's a very aggressive driver results-wise as well, grabbing top 5. So as I said, that was criticism of Castroneves' title hunt in 2013, just settling for top 10s. Montoya went for the top 5s. Over half the races he finished in the top 5. It's fantastic to see 13 top 10s in total as well. Just those couple of finishes outside the top 10 at Alabama, at Mid-Ohio, that retirement at Iowa. But the thing about the sister that really stands out to me is, apart from his qualifying, where he still needs to improve on that Red Bull tyre. Yes, he was 5th out of everyone in 2015, but that was the worst out of all the Penske drivers. So that leaves him in the worst position to battle his teammates. And as I said, at Penske, they like battling there. They don't put in team orders. So he needs to improve that for 2016 if he really wants to battle and dictate races, because looking at his laps there, 145 over 8 races, that's closer to Simon Pagino's total of 132 over 6 races than Will Powers and Helio Castroneves, where they led in 11 races each. They were able to dictate more races than Montoya, who seemed to be more battling in races. He had these couple of races where he was in control at NOLA for the most part. In the second race in Detroit, of course, he started in pole of those races, was able to hold on during those difficult conditions, but then just got out strategized in the end. And then at St. Pete, he was in control. He was on second place for most of that race, and in the end, he uncorked the bottle and managed to leapfrog Power. So for Montoya, yes, it was a very good year, but there's still a couple of things to work at. And he has pointed out he still needs to improve his qualifying, and he still he needs to get the most out of that red sidewall tyre. But 2015 was just a superb year for Montoya. Can he continue this in 2016? As I said, the man doesn't linger. He will want to win that title. He's just going to be just as hungry as he was in 2015, and I'm really looking forward to see what Montoya can do in 2016. If he goes off and does his homework again in the off-season and improves once again in 2016, he could be a very hard man to beat, just like he was in 2015. But that Chip Ganassi, that Scott Dixon, just toppled him and just toppled Penske once again. So that is the penultimate episode in the books, which means there's just one left as we look at the champions, Chip Ganassi Racing, next time. So now for watching, and I will see you then.